Hello, this is David Frothingham, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Wednesday, July 15th, 2026 issue of the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The lead headline is Peak of the Heat Wave. Toronto sets single-day record as downtown high reaches 37.3 Celsius by Gabriel Hilty and Xavier Mesquita. Toronto set a new heat record Tuesday as temperatures spiked above 36 degrees Celsius mark during an ongoing heat event. Environment Canada issued a yellow warning for heat in the city as temperatures reached the high of 37.3 around 5 p.m. at the downtown weather station, a reading which cracked a new temperature record for July 14th. The previous single-day record for July 14th was 36.8 Celsius, set back in 1995. Tuesday brought the peak of the heat wave for Toronto, according to Environment Canada meteorologist Peter Kimball, as the weather agency warned of poor air quality moving into southern Ontario from forest fire smoke in the northwestern part of the province. The new record for July 14th is still below Toronto's all-time temperature record of 40.6 Celsius, which has hit for 3 consecutive days in 1936, Kimball said. At least 225 people, mostly children and seniors, died during Toronto's worst ever heat wave from July 8th to July 15th in 1936. During that stretch, the Toronto Daily Star reported that around 10,000 people slept at the waterfront, while others camped in public parks to seek respite from the heat. The current heat wave, which is set to persist until Wednesday or Thursday, is being driven by a mass of hot air traveling from west to east from the Great Plains in the U.S., according to Kimball. Quote, on Monday it was over northern Ontario, he said, explaining that it was over southern Ontario on Tuesday before the hot air mass is expected to head south of the border into New York State Wednesday. Air quality in Toronto moderately risky. On Tuesday evening, the weather agency issued a yellow warning regarding the air quality with a moderate level. Quote, smoke from forest fires in northwestern Ontario is causing poor air quality to much of southern Ontario. Poor air quality will begin tonight and may last through Wednesday. The weather agency warned at-risk people to avoid outdoor or strenuous tasks while encouraging the general population to prioritize keeping cool. Comparing air quality across the world, Toronto took the 59th slot as in IQ Air's ranking of the most polluted major cities as of Tuesday afternoon with a moderate pollutant level. Second heat event in under 1 month. At the start of July, a several-day heat warning was issued in Toronto as Environment Canada warned of the dangerous effects of a long-duration heat event. Temperatures broke 40 degrees that week, and emergency services reported receiving an influx of calls possibly related to heat effects. The current temperature in Toronto for this July is 25 degrees, higher than the regular July average of 22, Kimball explained, cautioning that a lot can change in the rest of the month. 1921 was the hottest July on record when the mean temperature was 25.5 degrees. We would have to get even hotter for a while to break the record, he said. With cooler weather predicted for next week, it's more likely that this July will end well above average, but likely not as a record, according to Kimball. Transit delays. During Tuesday's evening rush hour, GO Transit reported heat-related delays and cancellations on 6 of 7 GO train lines. In an email to customers Tuesday afternoon, GO Transit said that prolonged periods of high heat, we are required to run trains at slower speeds. Significant delays were reported on the Lakeshore West, Lakeshore East, Milton, Kitchener, Barrie, and Stouffville lines, with several train cancellations throughout the evening. The TTC said it was monitoring the situation, but was not experiencing service issues due to the heat. What the city is doing. Toronto's heat relief strategy has been in full effect since Environment Canada issued a heat warning for the city on Monday. People can access more than 500 spaces to cool down across the city, like libraries and community centers. A 24-hour cooling space at 136 Spadina Road is also open. Water trailers are at Nathan Phillips Square, Mel Lastman Square, East York Civic Center, and Barbara Hall Park for the duration of the heat warning. 8 outdoor pools have also extended opening hours until 11:45 p.m. due to the heat warning. The next headline reads Sacre Bleu. Spain rains on Bastille Day party. French loss hits hard on the streets of Paris. By Alan Woods, staff reporter. Dateline is Paris. National days of celebration, think Canada Day or 4th of July, are supposed to end with fireworks. This 14th of July, on a date on which the French celebrate the storming of the Bastille fortress and prison in 1789 during the French Revolution, ended with a fizzle on a soccer field an ocean away from here in Arlington, Texas. The day began with a military parade along the Champs-Élysées, including the coalition of the willing, those countries, including Canada, backing Ukraine in its fight against Russia, and a solemn ceremony to mark the 10th anniversary of a deadly terror attack in Nice. But the French national team, Les Bleus, or the coalition of the not quite able, at least not on this night, were undone by a Spanish side that scored 2 unanswered goals to advance to the World Cup final on Sunday. Spain will play the winner of Wednesday's England-Argentina match. One of the first to forecast a disappointing end to France's monumental day may have been 10-year-old Demba. His father asked that his son be identified only by his first name to maintain privacy. For most of the match, the boy with the French flag painted on his cheeks took it upon himself to jump up from his seat and clear people out of the way when they stopped in the narrow cobblestone streets of Paris to watch the game on the big screen of a restaurant named Le Paradis, oblivious to those behind whose views they were blocking. About halfway through the second half, with the score stuck at 2-0 and a third goal by Spanish superstar Yamin Lamal having been called back for offside, young Demba got up from his chair and strode across to his father, Ousmane. Ousmane had been holding out faint hope for the team's comeback, but he was beside himself with frustration at France's inability to assert itself in the match. "Daddy," Demba asked, "if France doesn't win, who are you going to cheer for?" "For nobody," his father said. "What about you?" Demba didn't miss a beat. "For nobody, too." Kids do say the darndest thing, but there is a fusion that has developed over the years between the French people and their national soccer squad, led by Captain Kylian Mbappé. It's more than just the fact that seemingly every second person in Paris on Tuesday was draped in either official France jersey, the red, white, and blue team colors, or wearing the French flag across their shoulder. The symbiotic tie between team and country was forged in the years following the disastrous 2010 World Cup, when the French players were attacked for not singing the national anthem before matches. The players collectively refused to practice because one of their number, Nicolas Anelka, was kicked off the team for insulting the head coach. There is pressure, and it's the moment when the French Football Federation took back control over the players' public image, the symbolism of singing the national anthem, and a number of other behaviors to produce a more polished public image for the general public, historian Pascal Blanchard told the French sports daily L'Équipe. The team and its country have become more closely bound in the years since. The November 13, 2015 terror attacks that killed more than 130 people included a bombing at Stade de France on the outskirts of Paris during a soccer game between France and Germany. There has also been greater emphasis placed on the official charter that each player signs when accepting to play for the national team. It reminds that the players are one of 23 people picked from among millions of French soccer players to represent 65 million French citizens, and it obliges them to act professionally, to have fun, and to be respectful of the uniform and its history. And Tuesday's match began with a moment of silence to honor the memory of those 86 people killed in the July 14, 2016 terror attacks in Nice, France. Earlier in the tournament, players were motivated to perform well for coach Didier Deschamps, whose mother died June 23rd at the age of 86. Deschamps is a former national team captain who led France to a World Cup victory in 1998 and was coach when they once again claimed victory in 2018. But this World Cup tournament will be his last. France will play the loser of the other semifinal match on Saturday. After the match Tuesday, Deschamps admitted that his side was outplayed by the Spaniards, but was also critical of refereeing, and suggested there were a number of questionable calls. The disappointment is there. The players were devastated in their dressing room. The ambition was there. It hurts to have to come to an end. It's very, very hard because today, when we see the support of the French people, when we see the excitement that there is around us, when we see that the French team has brought together so many people around the flag, it's heartbreaking. Midfielder Ryan Cherki said in a post-match interview. Heartbreaking too for French President Emmanuel Macron, who congratulated Spain for its victory. Thanks to Les Bleus for wearing our colors with commitment, he wrote on social media. The defeat tonight is difficult, but this team is young and full of potential. The next headline in today's Toronto Star on the front section reads, Safety at Street Festivals Under Scrutiny. Councillor calls for serious rethink of event oversight. By Madis Hababinia. In the fallout of a deadly weekend shooting, questions are being asked about whether Toronto needs to rethink the way it hosts festivals that have long brought energy and flair to its streets over the summer. 2 men were killed and several people were injured Saturday in a shooting at Salsa on St. Clair, Canada's biggest Latin street festival. The aftermath has seen city councillors and residents alike floating ideas about how to make festivals safer. From increasing policing to screening attendees to enclosing the events and restricting their hours, even relocating them. But event safety experts caution against jumping to conclusions before the police and city can conduct a review of what happened. The ideas being floated, they say, can be costly or ineffective, with the potential to change the fabric of these events. Safety is always essential. It is the foundation of even having an event. If it can't be done safely, it's not worth doing, said Stephen Adelman, founder of the Event Safety Alliance USA. That said, there are no guarantees because there are lots of factors that are beyond the control of an event organizer or city official or even the local police, Adelman added. Rather, safety is about improving the odds of a good outcome. However, there is one thing everybody seems to agree about Toronto's street festivals. The city shouldn't surrender an important part of its cultural footprint by putting a stop to them. The local Hillcrest Village BIA board has questioned whether the salsa event, going on more than 2 decades, has become a victim of its own success, too popular and attracting too many people. Councilwoman Shelley Carroll said the shooting should prompt a serious rethink of how the city delivers festivals. That means right-sizing festivals, choosing locations strategically, and bringing more private sector partners to the table, said the councillor for Don Valley North. But Jack Rozdalisky, an associate professor at York University who researches emergency management, said time, location, space, and popularity are likely not the core issues. The hardest safety questions are not operational, they are structural, Rozdalisky said, referring to how troubling trends in criminality do not have easy fixes like restricting festivals to the afternoon or choosing a larger site. He pointed to the 2019 Toronto Raptors Parade, which drew millions of people in broad daylight from Exhibition Place to Nathan Phillips Square, and still resulted in a shooting. The lesson from that incident, said Rozdalisky, was that there was a failure of imagination in anticipating risk. Tara Shannon, executive director of the Ottawa Festival Network, said in her experience, as a festival producer, many factors affect risk assessment. It's not just about crowd size, but also whether there's alcohol or drugs, the demographic, the type of music playing, and the age group. I wouldn't say the number of people alone equals increased chance of incident, she said. Meanwhile, according to police, there were about 13,000 attendees on Saturday at Salsa on St. Clair. Meanwhile, organizers said that last weekend's Festival of South Asia attracted hundreds of thousands over the course of 2 days, and at the Aria on Yonga Brazilian Street Festival last month, organizers estimated there were about 80,000 attendees. There were no reported incidents at either. On Monday, Toronto Police Chief Myron Demkiw said the force is looking at how to appropriately staff future festivals, including whether to add security measures such as controlled access points or security screenings. But Adelman said Demkiw's ideas would be a challenge because completely gating off or enclosing a street festival wouldn't just block emergency response teams, it would close potential escape routes. If there's actually an active shooter, or if people incorrectly believe there's an active shooter, the result is the same. People will run, Adelman said, and when they run, they have to have a place to go. Otherwise, That will yield a different kind of tragedy, which is a crowd crush. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. For Rozdilsky, the suggested runs contrary to what the event is supposed to be. An open street festival cannot be fully hardened or protected, period. Security costs are also high for gated festivals that are ticketed, said Shannon. I mean, you'd have to gate pretty far around to still keep the vibe, she said. Logistically, it presents quite a challenge. Last year, organizers in Toronto told the Star that they were buckling under increasing costs for private security. Paid duty officers and hostile vehicle mitigation, like buses blocking streets. In response, the city announced $750,000 in additional security funding, split between 60 festival organizers, which has since become a recurring annual bursary. But festival organizers say high security costs remain a top concern. At larger events, this can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, a prohibitive expense, especially as some major events face severe budget pressures. For example, Pride Toronto had a $700,000 budget shortfall this summer. Taste of the Danforth was only able to return thanks to $400,000 in funding from the provincial and municipal governments. Adelman said screenings can be done quickly with walk-through magnetometers, similar to metal detectors people see at stadiums, but they are expensive. The biggest issue would be renting enough so that people could get into the festival without some enormous queue going down the street and around the corner, he said. That would dissuade people from going. Local councillor Josh Matlow said residents have suggested moving the Salsa on St. Clair from the street to a park or other location. It's possible, Shannon said, but it changes the experience of the event, and organizers have to weigh those decisions against what their cultural and artistic vision is. The minute you go from this sort of free-flowing, fluid street festival into an enclosed, gated park area where, yes, of course, you could screen people, it is a different experience. The next headline in today's front section of the Star: the city may be sweltering, but it's nothing like 1936 temperature topped 40 degrees for 3 days during deadly stretch, by Mark Colley, staff reporter. The teenagers flocked to the beaches and partied into the night. They swam in the waters and danced in the sand, strumming on guitars, listening to tinny music on portable radios. The flicker of the bonfires lit the dark. A young man wearing a bathing suit twirled his partner. They say they dance in Honolulu, he shouted across a packed beach, but is there anything better than this? If the rest of Toronto could hear him, he might have responded in a chorus, yes, there is. Anything. Because that week in 1936 was sweltering in Toronto. The city recorded 3 consecutive days of 40.6 degrees from July 8th to 10th. It was the hottest temperature Toronto has seen, according to Environment Canada. A smothering, stale breath of oppressive heat that left at least 225 people dead. It softened pavement, roasted fresh berries, and drove downtowners to the lake by the tens of thousands. The heat blew in from the west, hitting first in places like North Dakota and Minnesota. Farmers south of the Niagara Escarpment were already in the midst of a drought. Some hauled water from nearby towns as their cisterns ran dry. Then, on July 8th, the heat hit Toronto. A crushing blanket of almost insufferable heat that lay limp, sodden, suffocating, the Toronto Daily Star read that day. Think of these children last night, countless children, babies, crying, whimpering, suffering, sweating in the sultry heat, pining for coolness, without comfort, hope. Poor little children, poor helpless babies. People covered the entirety of Toronto's waterfront, but found only a slight breeze that struck the face like a blast from a furnace, according to the Star. People carted their mattresses to the lake and to the exhibition grounds and to backyards and verandas downtown. Baby carriages lined up by the dozens while parents slept on blankets nearby. One father slept with his alarm clock at his elbow. Police said they would not be enforcing an old bylaw that required parks to close at 10 p.m. One North York resident reported her garden gooseberries cooked under the sun. Record crowds were reported at the city's Sunnyside pool, and men opened a hydrant downtown. A peanut and popcorn salesman named Tony tried popping corn on the roadway. It didn't work. A man named Ian Murdoch claimed he fried an egg on the cement of the highway in 4 minutes and 35 seconds. James Robinson proudly defended his title as the oldest man at the Ward 4 Liberal picnic for the second year in a row. In 1935, he won a prize for his accomplishment and gave a speech. In 1936, withering at the age of 96 and 40 degrees, he collapsed on his daughter's shoulder and was escorted home by police. Roy Beatty, 19, suffered a heart attack while delivering groceries on a bike. Mrs. Oldfield on Jarvis Street found 2 black squirrels distressed in her backyard and revived them with water. William J. Collicly was on a train pulling out of Hamilton when the bottle he was holding exploded from the heat, injuring his wrist. The Star estimated more than 40,000 people fled to the waterfront. People stopped their cars on the highway, threw off top garments, and ran to the waterfront in bathing suits, the paper reported. Some moved their entire living rooms to their front lawn or to their cellars. At Trinity Bellwoods Park, others wrapped their shoes in newspapers and used them for pillows while they slept under the open sky. The demand for lemons soared so high that the price for a dozen doubled from 25 cents to 50 cents. The Star also reported a fan famine, with all electric fans across the city sold out. Reports poured in of pavement which had literally exploded. 12 pet rabbits were reported dead. The Humane Society advised to not give cats or dogs water, instead feeding them a teaspoon of milk or bismuth every 3 hours. An elderly man working for the Parks Department attempted to water the lawn at Kew Beach with a hose. Several hundred children stole the hose and used it to spray themselves for more than an hour before the man could wrestle it back. The city banned lawn watering and supplied water to East York, which was hours away from running out of water entirely on July 9th. By July 11th, the death toll began to rise. Ambulances reported the busiest day in Toronto's history. Hearses discarded years before were brought in to accommodate the enormous demand. Cemeteries hired extra grave diggers. Florists saw higher demand than they had during the First World War. "We never had it like this before," said an official at a hearse company. Even during the war or the flu pandemic. One 70-year-old man was a pallbearer in the morning and died from heat in the evening. All told, the heat wave killed 550 people in Ontario, more than half were in Toronto. Mercifully, on the evening of July 13th, cool winds blew in, the city returned to normal, the worst heat wave in its history was over. By July 16th, the pages of the Toronto Daily Star, the weather had been relegated back to where it normally resided, a small, fine-printed box in the bottom right corner, below a story on the Old Age Revolving Pensions National Convention in Cleveland. The next article in today's front section reads, "Strike Threat. WestJet flight attendants could walk off the job next month," by Estella Wren, business reporter. More than 4,000 WestJet flight attendants are expected to vote in favor of a strike mandate that could allow members to legally walk off the job as early as August 2nd, 2 experts told the Star. The Canadian Union of Public Employees Local 8125 will release the results of the vote early Wednesday. The union has been bargaining with the Calgary-based carrier since last fall for a new collective agreement to replace the one that expired on December 31st, 2025. The union encourages members to vote in favor of strike to strengthen its bargaining position. "My membership seems very mobilized," said Aliyah Hussein, president of CUPE 8152, "so we're very hopeful that we get a strong mandate." The flight attendants union must provide 72 hours notice before it can legally walk off the job. WestJet flight attendants are among the lowest paid in Canada, Hussein said, and have performed unpaid work, including during flight delays and while handling ground evacuations and medical emergencies. Those issues, she added, are among the main sticking points in bargaining. Ground duty pay emerged as one of the most contentious issues in Air Canada flight attendants' contract fight last summer. The dispute culminated in a roughly 72-hour strike that canceled hundreds of flights. The airline eventually agreed to compensate flight attendants for ground duty at 50% of their hourly rate, for the hour before takeoff, increasing to 70% by the fourth year of the contract. But Hussein called the Air Canada deal barely a win, arguing that it does not compensate flight attendants for hours spent working during delays. "We want all hours paid," she said. "However, we're looking to be reasonable, and we're looking to find a deal." WestJet pays its crew members based on a complex credit hour system. The airline considers 80 credit hours a month full-time work and pays a starting rate of $28.80 an hour as of January 2025, which amounts to $2,304 a month. Low wages force 30 to 40% of flight attendants to have side jobs to make ends meet, Hussein said. "The system has to end," she said, "and it's not enough for big corporations that rake in billions to say they can't afford to pay their largest working groups, who are predominantly women." WestJet did not respond to the Star's request for comment, but claims on its website that its credit hour system covers all duty time, both on the ground and in the air. Stephen Tufts, an associate professor of labor at York University, told the Star he expects the union to secure an overwhelmingly strong strike mandate. "WestJet has to give ground pay," said Tufts. "It's a generational change in the way flight attendants are compensated." The question is whether the federal government will intervene and send the dispute to arbitration before a strike even begins, Tufts has said, adding that such a move could put the government at odds with labor advocates. Tufts said that he would not be surprised if Prime Minister Mark Carney chose to intervene, giving his focus on building Canada into an unimpeded trading economy. John Gradek, a lecturer in aviation management at McGill University, who also expects an overwhelming strike mandate, said it is difficult to predict how WestJet will address the union's key demand, given the airline's long-standing position on keeping costs down. Air Canada set the precedent, and WestJet, as much as they don't like it, they have no choice but to get on the bandwagon. Hussein told the Star that she would like to believe that the airline would come to the table with a solution. "The union is committed because the last thing we want our Canadian traveling public to experience is another strike," she said. "We don't want that at all." The next headline in today's Star reads, "The race is on. Bonnie Crombie on why she's running for mayor again." And there's a picture of Bonnie Crombie here at the top of the article, which is by Alicia Hasham. There have been only 3 mayors in Mississauga since 1978. Hazel McCallion, Bonnie Crombie, and Carolyn Parrish. McCallion died in 2023, aged 101, but her formidable presence still looms over the mayoral race between her mentee, Crombie, and her adversary, Parrish. After departing in her third term for a failed attempt to take down Premier Doug Ford as Liberal leader, Crombie cited McCallion in an exclusive interview about why she deserves her old job back. "If there's one thing I've learned from Hazel McCallion, besides do your homework, it's fiscal discipline," Crombie told the Star this week. "You need more discipline to keep taxes at a manageable level." After registering her candidacy at the Mississauga Elections Office Tuesday morning, flanked by supporters and family, including her 5-month-old granddaughter, Crombie has joined the race again against incumbent Parrish, elected mayor in June 2024 by election, along with councillors Alvin Tejo and Deepika Demirla. Crombie says she's been frustrated by Parrish raising property taxes too high in her 2 years as mayor. Mississauga property taxes, which include a portion set by the city and a portion set by the Peel region, went up by 6.1% in 2023 and 7.2% in 2024. In 2025, it went up by 9.2%, which the city stressed was largely due to a historic increase in the Peel Regional Police budget. In 2026, the increase was 5.2%. "I've looked around and I've witnessed firsthand that the city lacks direction. It's adrift. It lacks leadership, quite frankly," said Crombie, who on Sunday publicly announced her decision to run after months of consideration. "I'm back because I think I have the leadership skills, the experience, the vision, and frankly the energy to get the city back on track." When presented with Crombie's attacks on her time as mayor, Parrish said in an email that they are fabrications from a failed Liberal leader who is now attempting to treat Mississauga as some kind of political fallback position. Shame. These claims do not deserve a response. Crombie said she has always been passionate and committed to Mississauga. When I left briefly, it was to elevate our needs at the province, she said. I brought all the learning experience back. Speaking to the media, she said being mayor is a better job. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. It also happens to pay more. Crombie made $185,000 as Ontario Liberal leader, less than the $297,515 she earned in her last year as mayor, including her salary from the region of Peel. And she said she isn't concerned that she did not win the provincial seat in Mississauga's Streetsville last year, citing her overwhelming mayoral win in 2022. I'm not reliving past battles. I'm looking forward. In a statement Tuesday, Tejo, the runner-up in the 2024 by-election, took aim at both Parrish and Crombie. Mississauga wants fresh ideas and new leadership, and not more of the same, he said. Demurla said residents have lost trust in Mississauga City Hall under Crombie and Parrish, and is calling for a thorough audit of city spending. Crombie specifically took aim at Parrish over her criticism of the rising police budget and burden it places on property taxpayers, something Crombie herself expressed concern about during her tenure as mayor. Parrish stepped down from the Police Services Board as a way to more freely criticize unprecedented growth in the Peel police budget, increased by 70% since 2019, and its costs for residents. She has also argued that Mississauga is paying an unfair amount of the shared bill compared with Brampton, and is exploring whether Mississauga should have its own police force. In an interview, Crombie acknowledged policing has a large cost, but said Parrish has taken the wrong approach to solve it. She accused Parrish of abdicating her role on the police board instead of being supportive and collaborative with the police force to shape their budget. Chief Nish Duraipa has been a model chief, Crombie said. I have nothing but praise for Peel Regional Police and our chief and his team of deputies. Parrish has denied being anti-police, noting her father was a Toronto police officer. Both Crombie and Parrish agree the police funding formula should change. They've also both looked at ways to extract Mississauga from regional governance, something McCallion long pushed for, and which the province briefly considered before scrapping the idea in 2023. Crombie said she isn't concerned about her ability to work with Ford, who launched attack ads at her during the last provincial election. She said he would send an army to thwart a return to power for her in Mississauga. We had a good working relationship when I was mayor, and we will again because we want the same things, she said, pointing to Ford's collegial relationships with the past political foes Brampton Mayor Patrick Brown, Vaughan Mayor Stephen Del Duca, and Toronto Mayor Olivia Chow. A common refrain in Mississauga is that after the mayor for life experience with McCallion, the city's voters are unused to competitive mayoral elections, leading to lower than average voter turnouts. Crombie contends this race will be different and more exciting. That would make it more like the first time she ran for mayor in 2014 to succeed McCallion. In that instance, McCallion's late endorsement was the difference maker. Speaking to media outside the Mississauga elections office Tuesday, Crombie continued to draw parallels between herself and McCallion, citing how they both drew investment to the city. When asked what she would do this time, without McCallion by her side to vouch for her and break through the noise, Crombie sidestepped. I welcome the competition, she said. The next headline reads, Teen Sorry for Wretched Act. Youth who killed 83-year-old in front of her Pickering home faces sentencing. By Jennifer Pagliaro, crime reporter. The 15-year-old boy set to be sentenced in the murder of a Pickering woman said he was deeply sorry for the harm he caused. The youth, who cannot be identified under the Youth Criminal Justice Act, pleaded guilty to first-degree murder in April in front of the Superior Court Justice Lisa Wanamaker, who was expected to rule on the length of his sentence on Wednesday morning in an Oshawa court. I had no right conducting that wretched act, the boy, who was 14 at the time of the stabbing, said standing in the prisoner's box in a well-fitted suit in an Oshawa courtroom on Tuesday. I did not want to bring harm to no one. He said he didn't wish for his actions to define who he is, and that there are no amount of words that can describe his remorse. What I can do is learn from this and acknowledge my wrongdoings and work on restructuring myself. In May 2025, the boy stabbed 83-year-old Eleanor Doney multiple times on her front lawn as she raked leaves, leaving her for dead until a passerby came across her and called police. That is according to an agreed statement of facts read in court and provided to the Star and other media after Wanamaker approved an application for youth records that are otherwise protected. Crown Attorney Tammy Derry and the boy's defense lawyer Aaron Dan told the judge Tuesday that they agreed the teen should serve the maximum youth sentence, 10 years, with 6 years in a youth facility receiving intensive programming and counseling, and the additional 4 under supervision in the community. Where they disagreed is whether the boy's more than 13 months in pre-sentence custody should be credited. Dan argued that he should be credited for 1 year, reducing his remaining sentence to 5 years in custody. The Crown argued that no credit should be granted after they abandoned an application to sentence the boy as an adult. Despite the joint submissions, the actual length of the sentence and whether credit is given is up to the judge. Wanamaker earlier heard that prior to the murder, the boy had an urge to kill and threatened violence in a group chat with friends. 1 day before the stabbing, the boy was suspended from school for 5 days for bringing a knife to school, the agreed statement of facts confirmed. The Star previously reported concerns raised by a Durham District School Board psychologist that several warning signs the boy was a risk to commit violence were ignored in the week leading up to the murder. Following the boy's arrest, investigators turned their attention to his online world, searching his devices and reviewing conversations he had on the popular messaging platform Discord, the statement said. What they found revealed the boy had an interest in psychopathy, killing, and serial killers, and that he was obsessed with the popular manga character who styled himself after a businessman and serial killer. On Discord, the statement said the boy discussed contemplating killing his grandmother and harming animals. His troubling interests intensified ahead of May 29, 2025. Less than 2 weeks before the stabbing, police found photos the boy had taken on an iPhone in his bedroom. Around 1:30 a.m., he photographed an intersection approximately 200 meters from the site of the future stabbing. There was also a short video of a steak knife in a similar style to the knife believed to have been used in the homicide. The knife is also similar to a knife seized by his school on May 28, 2025. 4 days before the stabbing, investigators said the boy was seen on surveillance cameras in the residential neighborhood around 3 a.m., where he approached 2 different houses and pulled a knife out of a black bag before leaving. The statement said he was wearing the same unique clothing, a long black coat, black face mask, and black gloves, carrying the same briefcase in the CCTV footage. 1 day before the murder, after he was suspended, the boy posted a group chat with friends that, to avoid his arrest, he will be headed to Toronto via train and will not be present at school for a month or 5 months, and that during this time he might kill something, the statement said. He also said, "If I see that bitch again, I will kill her," which the statement said police believed was a reference to a female student who had led to his suspension that day. On a second seized phone, police found evidence of typical teen boy activities in the hours leading up to the murder, watching YouTube videos of Modern Family and one called How Geckos Defy Gravity. But there were also more sinister clips about serial killers. On May 29, 2025, he accessed 18 YouTube videos about the serial killer Ted Bundy and 6 videos about stalking. He also repeatedly accessed the Go Transit online schedule, the statement said. His streaming continued almost up until police, having scoured local neighborhoods looking for him, finally arrested him at his home. When police later searched the boy's family home, they found a Cuisinart knife set with one knife missing from the package, the statement said. Speaking with a psychologist For a pre-sentence report provided to the judge, the boy said he had an urge to kill in the weeks leading up to the murder. When he saw Ms. Doney in front of her home on May 29, 2025, the statement said, he knew he had a knife in his briefcase and carried out his plan to kill something by engaging her in conversation and stabbing her to death. The youth sentence for first-degree murder differs from that for adults. There is no minimum prison sentence, but a maximum of 10 years, only 6 of which can be in custody. For adults, there is a mandatory life sentence with no parole eligibility for at least 25 years. The next headline in today's paper reads, Defiant Iran Regime Shows Folly of America's War Hopes, by Martin Reg Cohn. When throngs crowded into Iran's holiest shrine this month to mourn their supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, it felt eerily familiar. Years before, I'd walked through the ornate halls of that same Imam Reza shrine on assignment in the northeastern city of Mashhad. The expressions of piety among worshippers at one of the most revered shrines in Shia Islam were plain to see back then. Watching from afar this month, I saw anguish etched again on the faces of mourners as Khamenei, targeted at the outbreak of the war with America and Israel, was laid to rest in this holy place. The funeral procession drew millions of mourners as it snaked across Iran, a reminder of the deep religious roots of the Islamic Republic and its polarized population. On the one hand, so many mourners lamenting the slaying of their supreme leader. On the other hand, so many citizens slain by the leader's security forces just weeks before the war broke out in late February, as many as 30,000 mowed down, not to mention those killed, arrested, and tortured in previous uprisings over the year. The point is that Iran is massive and massively divided. It's a country of more than 90 million people, anti-regime versus pro-regime, rural against urban. It is easy to be swayed by the large Persian diaspora and its discontents here in Canada and around the world. It is true that many of those still living in Iran dream of freedom, but a good many are animated by piety and fidelity to the Islamic Revolution. That's why the fantasy of instant regime change remains as facile as ever. It may happen one day, but it cannot be orchestrated by outsiders with recruits on the inside. The New York Times published a detailed report this week on how Israel's Mossad spy agency held meetings with former President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, hoping he could be the new old face of the regime change. The plan failed, and the revolt conjured up by Israel and the U.S. never came to pass. The explanation is in the funeral procession, where so many mourners still turned up, among them Ahmadinejad himself. He ultimately spurned his Mossad handlers. It's not just repression, but religion that keeps the Islamic Revolution alive. For all the political disenchantment and economic deprivation, the country is too divided to unite behind a new government anytime soon without massive upheaval and bloodshed. Now, all these months later, the war is back on, albeit in a different iteration. The U.S. is digging out of a disaster of its own making in the Strait of Hormuz after Iran played its so-called nuclear card, not deploying dreaded nuclear weapons, merely weaponizing the strait by lobbing conventional drones at passing ships that are now stranded. It's not as if closing the strait wasn't foreseen. U.S. President Donald Trump simply assumed that it wouldn't get that far, that the regime would fold first, or that it would back off in the aftermath. None of that, none of the above happened. Indeed, nothing fell into place. To be sure, Iran's nuclear weapons program has been decimated, its conventional navy degraded, and its anti-aircraft systems disabled. All of that went according to plan, but was almost beside the point. The Iranians still didn't give up. The population didn't revolt. Indeed, many people rallied behind the government. A decentralized command structure retained the ability to fight back. No matter how many leaders were killed and commanders culled by American and Israeli firepower, decapitation didn't trigger regime change in Iran, just regime churn. Now that deep-seated polarization has paralyzed the new leadership. Amid division, none of the newly empowered leaders is willing to go out on a limb to deliver on reopening the Strait of Hormuz, lest they be deemed sellouts. You reap what you sow. By stoking division, America and Israel have wrought defiance, not compliance. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. That said, it's hard to imagine that the Americans or any of the Gulf nations would continue to countenance Iranian hegemony over the strait and harassment of their countries. If the Americans and Israelis were guilty of hubris in starting the war, so too the Iranians are guilty of hubristically refusing to end it. Overplaying its hand, Iran dreams of replacing Pax America with Pax Persia. But Iran lacks the military firepower and economic staying power to match its ambitions. Its proxies are also under the gun. Hezbollah is hemmed in across southern Lebanon as the elected government in Beirut negotiates directly with Israel. And the Houthis in Yemen are under attack from Saudi Arabia, which is flexing its muscle alongside the United Arab Emirates. Belatedly but inevitably, the U.S. has responded, retaliating against Iran's attacks in the Strait and restoring a blockade of Iranian-controlled shipping. And so another Gulf War is upon us, pitting Iran against the Americans and the Arab states of the Gulf, with Jordan and Iraq also in the line of fire, all while pitting Iranians against themselves. The next headline reads, Bradford calls Deputy Chief's comments tone-deaf, by Ben Cohen, with files from Madis Habibina, Kate Allen, and Ben Spur. Mayoral candidate Brad Bradford says the police were wrong to call Toronto a safe city in the wake of the deadly Latin festival shooting over the weekend, and that, if elected in October, he will exert more control over the service than Mayor Olivia Chow has. In the hours after a brazen mass shooting at a beloved street festival, we had a police spokesperson come up to the microphone and tell us that the city is extremely safe, Bradford said at a news conference Tuesday morning. More than a dozen people were shot in Toronto this weekend. 3 of them are dead. To come out and characterize it as extremely safe is a bit tone-deaf in that moment. Bradford, who has represented Beaches, East York, on council since 2018, was paraphrasing Deputy Frank Barreto. The deputy chief told reporters near the site of the shooting on St. Clair West Saturday that no city past a certain size can hope to eradicate brazen, despicable crimes like these. Toronto is one of the safest cities in the world, he said, but we are 3 million people, and unfortunately we are completely immune to some of the things that happen globally, quite frankly. We are not completely immune to some of the things that happen globally, quite frankly. Bradford also criticized Police Chief Myron Demke, though he did not name him in his speech, for citing favorable crime statistics at a media conference Monday, which showed fewer recorded shootings this year compared to last. The right response from leadership is not to come out and cite statistics, he said. The right response is to say no, no more, not now, not ever. At a media conference Monday, Demke mentioned that the number of shootings in Toronto has fallen by more than 26% since this time last year. Even still, he said, when a brazen shooting occurs in a public setting, like what happened this weekend, it understandably shakes the sense of safety and security that Torontonians expect and deserve. From 2004 to 2025, annual shootings dropped 12.84%, according to police data. From the year with the most recorded shootings, 2019, the number of reports fell 57.59% last year. The number of shootings per 100,000 people fell 38.1% from 2004 to 2025. Police caution that this data set includes all reports of shootings, including those later discovered to have been inaccurate or falsified. Bradford said if he were mayor, he would make sweeping changes to prevent gun violence and promised that under his watch, no more weekends like this one would happen. I will make whatever changes are necessary, whatever changes are required, changes to the law, changes with the province and the federal government, changes to leadership to get this city back to what it should be. The mayor of Toronto has no direct influence over the criminal justice system, which is the purview of higher levels of government. Bradford said more police officers and dogs at festivals would be a good start. Regardless of the way police leadership has framed crime in the city, he said frontline officers who run toward gunfire are heroes. He also pledged to sit on the police civilian oversight board, which approves the service's funding request and selects new chiefs. Chow has not exercised this privilege, though her predecessor John Tory did. Instead, she appointed her close ally, Councillor Shelley Carroll, Don Valley North, to chair police board. The next headline in the world news reads, White House orders ICE to halt most vehicle stops. Dateline is Biddeford, Maine. Trump administration officials told immigration and customs enforcement officers to suspend most vehicle stops after 2 deadly shootings within a week, people familiar with the decision said Tuesday. The policy change came after an ICE officer shot and killed a Colombian driver Monday in Maine, and a week after one shot and killed a motorist in Houston, renewing criticism of the agency's enforcement tactics that were widely condemned last winter after the killings of Alex Preddy and Renee Good in Minnesota. In Florida on Tuesday, a third man in roughly a week died during an encounter with immigration officers. This time, a 28-year-old man was killed after he was hit by a tractor trailer while running from immigration and other federal officers, authorities said. The suspension of vehicle stops allows room for exceptions when executing a criminal warrant or working with partner agencies, according to a person who spoke Tuesday on the condition of anonymity to discuss sensitive law enforcement operations. Matthew Felling, a spokesperson for Maine Senator Angus King, said the senator's office was also told by the Department of Homeland Security that ICE was suspending stops. Hundreds of people in Maine protested Tuesday over the fatal shooting of Johann Sebastian Duran Guerrero, a 25-year-old Colombian national. DHS said Monday that an officer, fearing for public safety, shot and killed Duran Guerrero while officers were watching the home of someone they believed was in the U.S. illegally and facing a final order of removal from the country. It said in a post on X that when ICE tried to stop a car driven by someone who came from the home, the vehicle attempted to flee and the officer fired. That was a shift from how King earlier described the encounter when he said Homeland Security Secretary Markwayne Mullin told him that the officer opened fire after the man tried to use his vehicle as a weapon. King said Mullin told him the officers were trying to serve an arrest warrant, but not for the man who was shot. DHS, which oversees ICE, didn't respond to an email seeking clarity on what led to the shooting. In a scathing post on X, outgoing Colombian President Gustavo Petro called the shooting a targeted killing at the hands of the U.S. government. Petro, who has openly quarreled with U.S. President Donald Trump, urged Trump to provide an explanation and accused ICE officers of treating Duran Guerrero as an inferior being without rights. The shooting also sparked outrage in Maine, where hundreds of protesters gathered Tuesday outside an ICE detention center in Scarborough, just up the coast between Biddeford and Portland. These people are killers and they must leave our state now, organizer Todd Chrétien told the crowd, including some who held signs reading "Stop the Murder, End This Terror." Duran Guerrero's shooting marked the second time in a week that ICE used deadly force and at least the 9th to death since Trump began his immigration crackdown. Next headline of the world news reads, Air Force downs 5 Russian missiles. Kyiv must improve defenses before winter as power grid will be vulnerable to attacks by Moscow. By Ilya Novikov, Kyiv. Ukraine's Air Force said Tuesday it intercepted 5 ballistic missiles launched by Russia in a raft of overnight attacks, although other missiles and drones got through and hit warehouses and a school in the capital of Kyiv. It was the first time in almost 2 weeks that Ukraine said it had downed Russian ballistic missiles, which are harder to stop than drones or cruise missiles, and have pummeled the country in Moscow's 4-year-old full-scale invasion. Ukrainian air defenses likely used the U.S.-made Patriot surface-to-air guided missile system that is the most effective way of countering ballistic missiles, but ammunition for it has been in short supply amid the Iran war, despite European efforts to make up for the shortfall. Along the cobblestoned Champs-Élysées in Paris, crowds cheered Ukrainian troops marching in the annual Bastille Day parade, and President Volodymyr Zelensky received an ovation from European leaders who showed solidarity with Kyiv. Ukrainian aviators trained in France flew aboard two Mirage 2000B fighter jets alongside French Air Force pilots. Zelensky was in France seeking a remedy to his country's air defense problem, and he announced Monday that Ukraine is joining with 9 other nations to form a coalition that will build a shared ballistic missile shield for Europe. Ukraine and its partners said could jointly develop a mass-produced, low-cost system in the next 12 months. The Bastille Day parade featured about 500 troops from the Coalition of the Willing, a group of countries that have pledged to help with Ukraine's post-war security. French President Emmanuel Macron called it a great honor to welcome them to the parade. Tuesday's attack in Kyiv caused fires at 2 warehouses and also damaged a school, Mayor Vitaly Klitschko said. The Russian Defense Ministry said in a statement it targeted military manufacturing facilities that produced long-range missiles and drones. Moscow is seeking to choke off Ukrainian strikes on oil facilities deep inside Russia that have caused critical fuel shortages, frustrating the public and, Western analysts say, are hindering the Russian army's advance on the front line. Ukraine's Air Force said 1 ballistic missile and 25 drones struck 17 locations, while falling debris was reported in 10 locations. Ukraine urgently needs to improve its air defense shield before winter. Much of the country is at the mercy of Russian missiles that have hammered its power grid since 2022, making winters almost unbearable. U.S. President Donald Trump said at the NATO summit last week that the U.S. will give Ukraine a license to make Patriot missile systems itself. However, they are expensive, in high demand, and take a long time to produce, so it will likely be years before any Ukrainian-made systems are ready to deploy. Ukraine, meanwhile, kept up its long-range onslaught on Russian targets, especially oil facilities. The Russian Defense Ministry said its air defenses overnight intercepted 288 Ukrainian drones. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the 15th July 2026 issue of the Toronto Star. Your reader has been David Frothingham. Thank you for listening.